They didn't plan on becoming anyone's symbol of hope that night. Two people simply laced up their skates, stepped onto the ice, and tried to disappear into the soft glow of winter lights. And yet, without knowing it, they were walking straight into a moment that would test everything they believed about love, loss, and second chances. The rink was crowded, but in that gentle, muffled way winter has of softening the edges of the world. Music floated over the ice, distant and warm like an old memory. Keanu pulled his scarf a little higher against the cold, watching his breath turn to fog. Alexandra tugged at her gloves, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. To anyone watching, they looked calm, relaxed, just another couple on a quiet December night. But under their layered coats, both carried a private weight that no one else could see. He had almost canceled. The last few weeks had been heavy, too many interviews, too many bright lights, too many people wanting something. The idea of a public rink, cameras, strangers, all of it felt exhausting. Yet when Alexandra had texted just a simple, "ice skating tonight," he hadn't even hesitated. Because with her, he didn't feel like an actor or a legend or a headline. He just felt human. The kind of human who could stumble and laugh on slippery ice and not feel judged for it. Alexandra, on the other hand, had spent the entire day talking herself into this. She had never liked the spotlight. The way people stared, the way whispers followed them, it still made her shoulders tense. She was an artist, someone used to standing behind her work, not in front of flashing cameras. But she also knew how rare it was to find someone who listened to silence the way he did, who treated her art, her opinions, her doubts, as if they were precious. That kind of gentleness didn't come often in life. You either honored it or you lost it. They stepped onto the ice together, fingers brushing, then naturally linking like they had done it 1,000 times before. For a moment, everything else faded. Just the sound of blades on ice, the soft thud of distant music, the warm glow of string lights hanging above them. He squeezed her hand, steadying her as she wobbled, and her laughter slipped out, bright and unguarded. In that instant, the years of guardedness, of armor built against pain and disappointment, felt strangely far away. But even as they found their rhythm, skating in slow circles, the outside world crept back in. A few people at the edge of the rink started to notice. A phone lifted, then another. Whispers turned into quiet excitement. Keanu felt the shift, that almost invisible tightening of the air when anonymity began to melt. His shoulders tensed for a second, the old instinct to retreat rising up. He looked at Alexandra, expecting to see the same discomfort in her eyes, the same worry about suddenly being on display. What he saw instead took him by surprise. Her expression had changed, yes, but not into fear. There was something else there, something raw and complicated. Her gaze wasn't on the phones or the faces, but on the far end of the rink where the crowd was thinning. Her lips parted slightly as if she recognized someone or something out there in the blur of motion and light. The color had drained a little from her cheeks, and he felt her hand tighten in his, just for a heartbeat, as if she had been pulled somewhere far away in her mind. "Alex," he murmured, slowing their pace, curiosity pricking the calm of the evening. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on a figure near the rail, someone bundled in a dark coat, standing unnaturally still while everyone else moved. The music dipped into a softer melody, as if the whole night were holding its breath. Keanu followed her gaze, searching for what had suddenly shaken her so deeply. When their eyes finally found the figure's face, Alexandra's breath caught in her throat. The person looking back at them was someone she never expected to see again, someone tied to a painful chapter of her past that she had never fully told him about. And as the figure stepped forward, recognizing her in the glow of the lights, Alexandra's fingers slipped from Keanu's hand, leaving him standing on the ice, heart pounding, with no idea why the joy of the evening had shattered in an instant. For a moment, the cold didn't come from the ice or the winter air. It came from the memories pushing up through Alexandra's chest, sharp and sudden, as if the years between then and now had vanished. The man at the edge of the rink wasn't a stranger. His name was Daniel, the first person who had ever believed in her art, the first person who had also broken her trust so deeply she'd sworn never to put her heart in anyone's hands again. She had met Daniel when she was still unsure if she even deserved to call herself an artist. He had been charming, confident, the kind of man who walked into a gallery and filled the room without even trying. He praised her work, introduced her to collectors, stood proudly beside her at exhibitions. But behind closed doors, he had chipped away at her slowly, second-guessing her choices, pushing her to change for the sake of market appeal, taking control of contracts and deals until her own name felt distant from her art. When she finally realized how much power she had handed over, how much he had profited not just from her work but from her silence, it had already cost her years of self-doubt, and more than a few nights of tears she never told anyone about. Leaving him had taken every ounce of courage she possessed. Lawyers, tense conversations, the risk of losing everything. She rebuilt her life piece by piece, vowing she would never again let anyone stand that close to the center of who she was. And then, much later, she met Keanu, quiet, humble, endlessly careful with her heart. He never tried to direct her, he asked. He never spoke for her, he listened. With him, trust didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like a choice freely made, day after day. Now, seeing Daniel here of all places, on this night, in this fragile, happy moment, felt like some kind of cruel test. She stepped off the ice almost without realizing, the bladed boots clacking awkwardly against the rubber mat near the rail. Keanu followed, his face written with concern but giving her space, not crowding her with questions. That was one of the reasons she loved him. He didn't rush to fix things. He waited until she was ready to speak. Tonight, though, even she didn't know what to say. "Alexandra," Daniel said, voice soft, surprised, tilted with that same polished warmth she remembered. "It's been a long time." Her throat felt dry. "You shouldn't be here," she replied before she could filter it, the words harsher than she intended. She caught a few people glancing over their shoulders now, sensing tension. The phones had turned, losing interest in the novelty of a celebrity on skates and tuning instead into the drama unfolding near the rail. Keanu studied Daniel, not with aggression, but with an attentive stillness that could be more intimidating than anger. He stepped half a pace closer to Alexandra, not in front of her, not shielding her, just beside her, close enough that if she reached out, her hand would find his coat sleeve. Daniel offered a tight smile. "Look, I don't want to make a scene. I saw you and I just wanted to say I'm sorry, really sorry for everything. I'm in town for a few days, and when I saw you on the ice..." His eyes flicked to Keanu, lingering just a fraction too long. "I thought maybe it was time to make things right." The words pressed against her chest, heavy and complicated. She had dreamed of an apology once, years ago, on those sleepless nights when anger and hurt argued inside her head. But she had imagined it alone, on her own terms, not here in front of people, on a night that had finally felt light again. "People like you don't show up to make things right," she said quietly, her voice trembling with more emotion than volume. "You show up to rewrite the story." A small crowd had formed now, pretending to tie skates or adjust scarves while they watched. Keanu could feel the tension rising around them, the familiar sensation of curiosity sharpening into scrutiny. He hated that for her. He hated that something so private was being dragged into the open under a net of phones and sidelong glances. "Alex," he murmured, turning slightly toward her. "Do you want to go? We can leave right now." She looked up at him, and for a moment the noise around them blurred into a distant hum. There was concern in his eyes, yes, but also something else, trust. He wasn't going to decide for her. He wasn't going to rescue her like she was fragile glass. He was offering her a choice, one that didn't come with pressure or conditions. Daniel seemed to sense he was losing whatever fragile control he'd hoped to have. "I know I hurt you," he said quickly, his posture shifting, voice dropping as he tried to sound sincere. "I know I took advantage of your trust. I've spent years thinking about it. Therapy, sobriety, all of it. I'm not that man anymore. He hesitated, swallowing hard. "I just need you to hear that I regret it. I need you to know that." The confession hung between them, thick and unfinished. Alexandra felt an old ache stirring, but also something else she hadn't expected: fatigue. She was tired of carrying the weight of what he had done. Tired of letting anger define the edges of that chapter. Tired of wondering in the quiet moments if there was still some piece of her chain to that old story. She looked back at the rink, at the glowing lights and the kids slipping and laughing, at strangers clinging to each other for balance. A thought moved through her, clear and undeniable. This night had not been built out of pain. It had been built out of choice, her choice to keep living, to keep creating, to keep loving despite everything that had been taken from her. "Why now?" she asked finally, her voice steadier. "What do you really want, Daniel?" He opened his mouth, But before he could answer, a small commotion broke out behind them. A child had fallen hard on the ice near the center of the rink, the kind of fall that made even nearby adults wince. Skaters stumbled to a halt around the boy, and the music cut abruptly as an employee waved for space. In the confusion, someone slipped, colliding with another skater, sending both of them crashing dangerously close to the child still lying there. Keanu's instincts reacted before his thoughts did. With one sharp look at Alexandra, an unspoken question, "Are you okay if I go?" He pushed off toward the ice again, boots scraping, determination tightening his jaw. The staff was hurrying, but the cluster of panicked skaters was already tipping into chaos. As he stepped back onto the slick surface, ready to thread himself into the mess and pull people out of harm's way, Alexandra felt her heart leap into her throat, not because of the danger on the ice, but because of the decision forming in her own chest. For the first time in years, she realized she might have to confront two fears at once. The fear of watching someone she loved get hurt in front of her, and the fear of finally turning fully to face the man who once nearly erased her from her own life. She took a breath that shook from the inside out, then turned back toward Daniel, knowing that whatever she chose to say next would change the shape of her story, and not just for herself. He moved across the ice with a quiet urgency, not fast enough to cause another spill, but with a sure, steady pace that cut through the confusion. Keanu reached the fallen boy just as another skater lost balance and slid toward them. With one arm, he pulled the child gently but firmly out of the way. With the other, he braced the skater before they crashed into the ice. For a split second, all motion around them froze like a frame grabbed from a film. Faces tense, bodies twisted in mid-fall. Then everything exhaled at once. "You're okay," Keanu said softly to the boy, checking his arms, his legs, the shock in his eyes. "You're all right, just scared." The kid nodded, biting back tears, cheeks flushed from cold and embarrassment. Keanu didn't perform it. He didn't play to the crowd. He crouched low despite the ice biting through his knees, speaking only to the child as if no one else existed. Alexandra watched from the edge, her heart beating fast for reasons that had nothing to do with the near accident. She had seen kindness from him in 100 small ways, quiet gestures, thoughtful silences, the way he helped set up chairs at late-night art events without anyone asking. But there was something different about seeing it here in public when everyone was looking. He didn't change. He didn't become someone else. The humility, the care, the focus on the most vulnerable person in the room, it was all the same. "Of course," Daniel murmured beside her, a trace of irony in his voice. "He's a hero everywhere he goes, isn't he?" She turned sharply toward him, a flash of anger cutting through her fear. "Don't do that." "Do what?" Daniel asked, lifting his hands in a little show of innocence. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." "No," she said, her tone firm now. "You're trying to turn this into a stage so you don't have to look at what you did. You used to do that with me, make everything a performance. I'm not standing in that role again." The words surprised even her. They came out not as an accusation thrown from a wound, but as a boundary laid down by someone who had finally learned how to stand in her own life. For a brief moment, the years of therapy, long nights in her studio, endless canvases smeared with trial and error, they all converged into this one act of simple, clean defiance. On the ice, Keanu guided the boy carefully to the edge, helping him off the rink to where a worried parent rushed forward. He gave them a gentle reassurance, then straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders as if feeling the tension of everyone's eyes. Strangers nodded at him, some mouthing "thank you," some lifting phones, trying to capture the moment. He accepted none of it. He just offered a small, grateful nod back as if he were the one who'd been helped somehow and turned to look for Alexandra. He found her still beside Daniel, but now there was something different about the way she stood. Her shoulders were set, not rigid with fear, but anchored. Her chin was lifted, not in pride, but in quiet resolve. He could feel it before he even reached them. Something inside her had shifted. "You all right?" he asked gently as he approached, searching her face before glancing briefly at Daniel. She held his gaze and exhaled. "I'm okay," she said. "I need to do this." Those 4 words lit a small flare of worry in him, but he nodded. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. The question wasn't casual, it was specific. "Are you asking for my presence or my distance?" She considered it, surprising herself with how seriously she weighed the options. A part of her wanted to walk away with him, to let the night swallow this encounter and never look back. Another part knew that if she did, Daniel's ghost would keep wandering through her thoughts, popping up at the edges of her happiness like a shadow she refused to turn and face. "I want you close," she said at last, her voice soft but unwavering. "But I need to speak for myself." He accepted that without argument. He moved half a step back where she could still feel his presence, like a solid wall at her back, yet he wasn't between her and Daniel. He was there not as a shield, but as support, and the difference mattered more to her than she could explain. Daniel looked from one to the other, reading the unspoken understanding in their small, quiet exchange. Some mixture of regret and bitterness crossed his face, a flash of what-ifs that came too late. He shifted his weight, drawing his coat tighter around himself. "You've changed," he said to Alexandra, almost in awe. "Yes," she replied. "I have. That's what people are supposed to do." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music on the rink had started again, a softer track now, careful, as if the DJ sensed the lingering tension in the air. Skaters resumed their loops, slower, more cautious. The night moved on, but this one conversation hung still in the cold, electric between them. Daniel's voice lost some of its practiced smoothness when he spoke again. "I know you probably won't believe me, but I am sorry," he said. "I was selfish. I treated you like a resource, not a person. I took your voice and called it guidance. I know I can't undo it. I need to not be the villain in your mind forever." Alexandra felt herself flinch at that last sentence. Not because it was cruel, but because it revealed the center of his regret. It wasn't really about what she had suffered. It was about how he was remembered. "That's the problem," she answered quietly. "You're still thinking about you, about how you're seen, how you're defined. You took my story and rewrote it around yourself. Even your apology is about escaping being the villain." He opened his mouth, then closed it, the truth of it landing harder than any accusation. Some part of his armor cracked. She could see it in the way his shoulders dipped, in the way his gaze dropped to the ground for the first time. She continued, her voice steadier now, gaining a kind of fragile courage as she spoke. "Do you know what it took to trust anyone again after you? To trust myself? I painted whole series I never showed anyone because I didn't know if they were mine or your voice in my head, criticizing every line. I lost years to that. Years. And the thing that hurts the most is not just what you did. It's that you walked away and got to decide when you were ready to feel bad about it." Keanu listened, his chest tightening with a fierce mix of protectiveness and respect. He had heard fragments of this story before, late at night, in pieces she had been willing to share. But this was different. This was her putting the full weight of her experience into words, not for his understanding, not for anyone's approval, but because she had finally decided her truth deserved to be heard out loud. Daniel swallowed hard. Some of the polished charm slipped away, leaving behind a man who suddenly looked older, worn around the eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I can't pretend I didn't know what I was doing. I liked the power. I liked that you needed me. I told myself I was shaping your career, but really, I was just feeding my ego. I don't expect you to forgive me." His voice broke a little, the first crack of genuine vulnerability she'd heard from him in years. "I don't know how to live with what I did if I can't at least say it to your face." Those words hit her in a way she hadn't expected. There was something awful and honest in them. He wasn't asking for forgiveness now. He was admitting his own inability to outrun his past. And for the first time, she realized he, too, might be haunted, by a different ghost, but haunted all the same. Around them, the rink lights glittered on the thin layer of ice dust in the air, tiny particles catching the glow like floating fragments of glass. Alexandra took a slow breath, feeling the cold sting the back of her throat. She thought about what kind of person she wanted to be, not just in relation to him, but in the larger arc of her own life. She believed in growth. She believed people could change. She had seen it in herself. But believing in change didn't mean handing back the keys to the people who had once locked her out of her own future. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted, the truth landing with a weight that was both sad and strangely freeing. "Maybe not now, maybe not ever, but I also don't want to carry you around like a stone tied to my chest. I'm tired, Daniel, not just of you, of this story." He lifted his gaze to meet hers, eyes glossy with a grief he couldn't quite mask. "Then what do you want from me?" he whispered. She paused, feeling Keanu's presence just behind her, a steady warmth in the cold. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed, the sound bright and distant. The world hadn't stopped, even though this moment felt like a fault line in her life. What did she want from him? The answer formed slowly, not in her mind first, but in her heart. She didn't want anything from him, not anymore. What she wanted was something entirely different, something that terrified her more than his apology, more than the crowd, more even than the years she had lost. She wanted to choose fully, without shadow, the life she was building now, the man standing behind her, the art that was finally, clearly hers. And she knew that to do that, she might have to offer him something she had sworn never to give. Her fingers trembled as she curled them briefly into her gloves, then let them relax. She took a step closer to Daniel, not in reconciliation, but in resolve, and drew in a breath that tasted of metal and snow. "I think," she said slowly, feeling each word as if it were being carved into ice, "I might have to give you the one thing you want and the one thing you don't deserve at the same time." Daniel stared at her, confusion and fragile hope flickering across his features. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the scrape of skates. She glanced back at Keanu, met his eyes, and saw there a question, a deep concern, and also an unwavering faith that she knew what she was doing. In that reflection, she felt the full weight of the choice she was about to make. "It means," she said, turning back to Daniel as her pulse pounded in her ears, "that I might be ready to say the words you've been chasing for years." She let the sentence hang there, unfinished, the cold night held in a breathless pause, because the next words out of her mouth would either close the door on an old chapter forever, or open one she didn't yet know how to walk through. They stayed there in the buzzing quiet of the rink, everything around them moving, while their moment stood utterly still. Alexandra could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, in the hollow at the base of her throat. The temptation to walk away, to refuse this conversation, still whispered in the back of her mind. But another voice had grown stronger, a quieter one that sounded, for the first time, like her own. "I've been carrying you," she said finally, her eyes steady on Daniel S. "Not you as a person, you as a story, the girl who didn't know better, the artist who couldn't stand up for herself, the woman who let someone else define her. I've let that version of me sit in the center of my life for too long." He swallowed, his expression tightening. "I know I—" "Don't interrupt," she said, calm but firm. "Just listen, really listen, because this is the last time I'm going to talk about this with you." The words surprised him. They surprised her, too. But once she said them, she felt something loosen in her chest, like the first crack in a window stuck shut for years. "I told myself I was over it, that I had moved on. New work, new shows, new life," she continued. "But I still flinched every time I touched a contract. I still heard your voice when I was about to make a choice, asking if I was sure, if it was smart for my career. You were gone, but you weren't gone. You were in the spaces I refused to look at." Keanu shifted just behind her, careful not to intrude, but she could feel his attention like a steady light on her back. She wasn't doing this for him, and he knew that. He was just there, the way someone holds a hand at the edge of a cliff, even if they're not the one about to look down. Daniel's gaze shone, not with performance now, but with something rawer. "I can't ask you to forgive me," he said softly, "but if there is anything I can do to—" "That's just it," she cut in, her voice gentle but clear. "There is. You can't undo what you did. You can't give me back the years I spent doubting myself. You can't rewrite those nights or those contracts or those fears. That's done. I kept waiting for something from you, a perfect apology, a punishment, a piece of you that proved you were different. I thought maybe if I got that, I could finally let go." She paused and took a breath that felt like stepping into cold water. "But I realized tonight, watching him on the ice," she nodded slightly toward Keanu without turning, "that my healing was never supposed to belong to you. It's mine. It always was." Something in her posture changed then. Her shoulders eased but didn't slump. Her spine stayed straight, not out of defensiveness but out of choice. She was standing simply and fully in herself. "So here's what I'm going to do," she said. I'm going to give you the two things you're asking for, even if you don't fully understand that they don't belong to you." He frowned faintly. "Two things." "Closure," she replied, "and forgiveness." Keanu's breath caught behind her just for a second. He said nothing, but his hand flexed at his side, as if resisting the urge to reach for her. He trusted her enough to let her walk exactly as far as she needed to go, even if it scared him. Daniel shook his head slightly. "I don't deserve." "This isn't about what you deserve," she interrupted softly. "It's about what I refuse to carry anymore." The nearby chatter of skaters rose and fell like waves. A gust of wind blew across the rink, tugging at scarves and hats. It felt strangely like the world reminding them that time was still moving forward, whether they clung to the past or not. "I forgive you," Alexandra said, the words coming out slow, almost foreign on her tongue. "And before you mistake that for some grand gesture toward you, understand this clearly. I'm not doing it for your comfort. I'm doing it so I can finally walk away from this part of my life without dragging you behind me like a shadow." Daniel stared at her, eyes wide, like someone bracing for a blow and receiving mercy instead. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes, catching the rink lights. For a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was hoarse. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "I don't know how to accept that and still live with myself." "Then don't accept it as a gift," she answered gently. "Accept it as a boundary. I'm saying I forgive you, and this is the last time you get to stand inside my story." The sentence landed with a profound, quiet force. Not dramatic, not shouted, just final. He nodded slowly, like a man realizing he'd come looking for refuge and found instead the locked door he should have faced years ago. "Thank you," he managed, the words almost breaking. I'll leave you alone, for real this time." He turned as if to go, then hesitated, glancing once toward Keanu. There was a flicker of something there, regret, envy, respect, it was hard to tell. "Take care of her," he said softly. Keanu's reply was steady, simple. "She takes care of herself," he answered. "I'm just lucky enough to walk beside her." There was no bravado in it, no posturing, just truth. And somehow that was the sharpest contrast of all. Daniel nodded once, swallowed hard, and walked away into the swirl of strangers and lights, eventually dissolving into the moving crowd until he was simply gone. For a long beat after he disappeared, Alexandra stood very still, staring at the space he'd left behind. The noise of the rink washed back in, the scrape of blades, the echo of laughter, the tinny music from the speakers. Life flooded the silence. Keanu stepped closer, not rushing her, not filling the air with questions. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. She let the question settle inside her. How did she feel? Not suddenly healed, not miraculously light. The past hadn't vanished, but something had shifted. The anger, the bitterness, the constant replay of what-ifs, they felt less sharp, like a scar that finally stopped burning every time she moved. "Strange," she admitted. "Tired, sad a little, but also—" She searched for the right word, surprised by the one that arrived. "Free. I feel a little more free than I did an hour ago." He nodded, his eyes warm, proud without being possessive. "You were brave," he said. "Not for forgiving him, for telling the truth while you did it." She let out a small, disbelieving laugh, wiping at the corner of one eye with the back of her glove. "I almost walked away when I first saw him," she confessed. "I thought courage looked like confrontation, but maybe it just looks like not lying to yourself anymore." They stood there for a moment, quietly sharing that thought, the cold nipping at their faces, their breath fogging the air between them. The lights above glowed soft gold, casting a gentle halo on the ice. "Can we still skate?" she asked suddenly, with a half-smile that held a trace of the girl she used to be and the woman she had become. "I don't want the last memory of tonight to be him." His answering smile was small but full, the kind of smile that carried years of understanding behind it. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think we should." He offered his hand, not as a rescue, not as a claim, but as an invitation. She looked at it for a moment, then slid her fingers into his, feeling how naturally they fit. They stepped back onto the ice together, a little awkward at first, like beginning again. And in a way, they were. As they glided into the slow current of skaters, Alexandra glanced around and saw the phones still out, some discreet, some not. She knew people would talk. They always did. They would share clips of him helping the boy, of them skating hand in hand under the winter lights. They would build stories, rumors, captions about what this night meant. But for the first time, the outside narrative didn't scare her. Because she knew the real story now wasn't about a famous man on the ice, or an ex from the past, or even the apology that had finally arrived too late. The real story was quieter and deeper. A woman choosing to reclaim the authorship of her own life, and a man at her side who understood that love didn't mean rewriting her. It meant giving her all the room she needed to write herself. They circled the rink slowly, her balance returning, his touch steady but relaxed. At one point she stumbled slightly on a rough patch of ice, instincts flaring with the old fear of falling. His hand tightened, not catching her, not yanking her upright, just steadying. She laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that floated into the cold air. "I've got you," he said softly. She looked up at him and shook her head, smiling. "No," she replied, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the scarf around her neck. "We've got each other. That's the difference." They skated on as the night deepened, the city lights glowing around them like distant constellations. Somewhere behind them, an old chapter finally closed itself, not with a dramatic slam, but with the gentle click of acceptance. Ahead of them, the ice stretched open, imperfect and glittering, waiting to be crossed. And with every careful, clumsy, beautiful glide they took together, they wrote a new story, one built not on control or fear, but on kindness, humility, courage, and the quiet, stubborn resilience of two people who refused to let their past decide how fully they were allowed to love in the present.